Hey folks, I'm here today because of a YouTube video that I stumbled across the other day. The title of which was something like "How do you deal with bad attitudes on your team?" And I know there are a couple of things about that that made me click right away. Not because I want to know how to deal with bad attitudes on my team, but because there's something about there are two things really about that title alone that got me going. And one is deal with, right? Those two words. How do you deal with? It's There's nothing good coming, right? There's nothing good coming if you're trying to figure out how do I deal with this? How do I deal with this? And so in my title, I've written, how do you handle, which maybe not a whole lot better, but at least I don't, I don't, I don't have that, immediate cringe in response that I had with how do you deal with? And then the second thing that got me about that title is how do you anything how do you do anything with somebody else's bad attitude? And maybe there really are three things that get me about this. So there's dealing with somebody's attitude at all, and then there's the judgment that their attitude is bad, as opposed to maybe even undesirable. Like I don't want to be around that attitude. That at least I get to choose what I want. I don't necessarily get to choose or decide whether your attitude is bad or good. It may fit with my values. It may fit with the culture that I'm trying to create around here. I don't get to decide. If I'm really being fair, I don't get to decide whether your attitude is good or bad. That the idea that I'm going to decide anything about your attitude, well, let me get to that in just a moment. Let me start with, how do you handle bad attitudes on your team? My answer is simple right up front, and then we'll complicate it after that. How do you handle bad attitudes on your team? Well, you don't. You don't handle bad attitudes on your team because it's none of your business. My attitude, if I'm on your team, my attitude is none of your business. That's maybe hard news to swallow, right? Because I can hear your objections already. Of course, it's my business. I'm the leader of the team. I'm the owner of the company. I'm the CEO. I'm whatever it is. If you're in a position of leadership, and frankly, I think everybody in every company is in some way a position of leadership. We want leadership from all the people on our teams. And if you're in leadership, then culture and the way people behave and things like that is absolutely your business. And culture is behaviors, and the way people behave, that's your business. So you don't handle people's bad attitudes. You deal with, you address people's behavior. Here's the thing about the attitude, right? If you're still objecting, consider this. You know, you report to me, I'm your supervisor, and I say, hey, we need to talk about your attitude. What immediately happens in your mind and your body? What happens to your body chemistry? What happens? What are some of the immediate thoughts that you have? They're likely to be things like, what do you mean you want to talk to me about my attitude? What's wrong with my attitude? If I say to you, hey, you have a bad attitude. What's your first thought? The first words that come into your mind might be words that I don't want to say in a video, right? That they may be a little bit of F you coming up right immediately. As soon as I say I don't like your attitude, or there's a problem with your attitude, you're going to say my attitude is fine. There's no problem with my attitude, and you're going to immediately start talking about, whether out loud or in the privacy of your own mind, you're going to start talking about the circumstances. And I'm no longer, if I come to you about your attitude, if I was before, I am no longer somebody that you trust. I have just taken our trust from wherever it was and sent it crashing through the floor. Because here's the thing about your attitude and my talking to you about your attitude. If I talk to you about your attitude, I am breaking what I call the get out of my head rule. I don't know what your emotions are. Even if your fists are balled up and your eyebrows are down, I don't know that you're angry. I know that I'm telling myself that you're angry. I know that your fists are balled. I know that your eyebrows are down. I don't know that you're angry. it would require me to be psychic to know for sure. And if it would require me to be psychic to know for sure, then talking about whatever it is that I am, the story that I'm telling myself about you, if it would require me to be psychic to know for sure, then it breaks the get out of my head rule, because in order to know for sure, I'd have to be in your head, and I am breaking the get out of my head rule. That is not going to lead to trust. It is going to erode trust and lead very quickly to mistrust. And the more often I do it, the harder it's going to be to salvage that trust, and the further eroded the trust is going to be. So, how do you handle bad attitudes on your team? You do not. If you're following my guidance, you do not handle bad attitudes on your team, because bad attitudes are your team's business. If they've got an attitude of any kind, whatever that attitude might be, it violates the get out of my head rule. And now I've taken things away from you. It's kind of like, well, Schmuckler, what's the good news? I've given you the bad news. The bad news is you don't handle you don't address even the attitude. The good news is that you have a reason for thinking that their attitude is bad, and whatever that reason is, that is something that you can address. So let's talk about for a moment, what are the reasons that I come to the conclusion, that I tell myself the story that you have a bad attitude? Well, it may be that you're not coming to work on time. That doesn't require me to be psychic to know that. So that doesn't violate the get out of my head rule. That may be a reflection of what I'm calling a bad attitude. And so I can get to the attitude, or at least what really matters to me about the attitude, by addressing the behavior of being late to work all the time. And watch out for the all the time too, because if you're late 4 out of 5 every 5 days, then you're not late for work all the time. You're late for work about 80% of the time. So the precision and the accuracy and the specificity of what I talk to you about, that really matters. What else might be leading me to conclude that you have a bad attitude? Well, it might be that you're rolling your eyes. Do I need to be psychic in order to know that you are rolling your eyes? No, I don't. That's something that I can observe. It's something that is happening in the physical world. It doesn't require me to be psychic. I can speak to you're rolling your eyes. Hey, I notice you're rolling your eyes, right? That is something that I get to speak to, because it doesn't require me to be psychic. It doesn't break the get out of my head rule. The attitude that I believe you have might also be reflected in things like your facial expressions. It may be reflected in your tone of voice. Maybe you're raising your voice. Those things are behaviors. So I can say, hey, I notice you are raising your voice, right? And so how do you handle the attitude? In some ways, it's indirect. It's indirect, and yet I'm the guy who's always talking to you about being direct and not hinting, right? One of the tenets, one of the principles that we teach the teams that we're training to teamify better is be obvious, right? And so we're talking about, there are no elephants in the room, no hinting. Don't be subtle is one of the ideas that be obvious, this principle suggests, is don't be subtle, no hinting, nothing goes without saying. And so there's nothing indirect about speaking to you're rolling your eyes. There's nothing indirect about speaking to you're being consistently or frequently late to work. There's nothing indirect about my saying, I notice you are raising your voice. There's something actually much more indirect about saying, I don't like your attitude. Is I'm skirting around what is the behavior that I'm noticing, because for some reason that feels harder for us to deal with. It feels harder for us to speak to. There's often in a lot of cultures, and in the US in particular, I think, and there are other places maybe where this is even more true. There's an unwritten rule that we don't respond to each other around anything other than what's in the transcript, right? The words that people say. And we have our discussions, our debates, even our arguments very often around what was it that was or was not said. So if you find yourself talking to yourself about the bad attitudes of the people on your team. You don't like this attitude. Here's my suggestion for you. My suggestion for you is that you consider slowly, deliberately, carefully, what are the behaviors that I'm seeing that reflect in my mind this attitude that I don't want? And let me speak to those behaviors. Hey, it does not work for you to be late. I need you to be on time. That's a job requirement. And I won't get into the method and the model for giving effective feedback that we go through, that we train teams on at the YesWorks right here and right now. Feel free to reach out to me, and we've got other videos about the coin model for effective feedback, which always starts with, hey, can I give you some feedback? Regardless, the point is here, address the behavior. Require a change in behavior. If you find yourself thinking, I don't like this attitude, then ask yourself, what is the behavior that I'm seeing that I'm interpreting as a bad attitude? And what is the behavior that I want instead of that? And so you can point to, when talking with and having the challenging conversation with the person on your team, you can talk about the behavior that is and compare that to the behavior that is desired, and what are the consequences if this behavior doesn't transform into that behavior, and what is the timeline in which that transformation must occur in order not to get these consequences. Very often, what you'll find is that the attitude changes. Certainly, the behavior is more likely to change than if you speak to the attitude, because you're not going to be eroding trust in the same way. You're not going to be violating the get out of my head rule, which all of us have. We all have the get out of my head rule in our own heads. What we don't necessarily have is the rule, I must stay out of your head. And I'm suggesting that you take on that rule as well. So you're not going to erode trust, which means that when you ask for a behavior change, you're more likely to get the behavior change. And with that direct communication, which I suggest also comes along with communications of faith. I have faith that you can make this change. How can I support you to make this change? That if you're standing for their success, then you're much more likely to get the behavior change that you want. If you don't get the behavior change that you want, then very likely the attitude that you may have been correct about, even though I'm suggesting you don't address it, the attitude that you may have been correct about in the environment of someone who is not tolerating undesirable behaviors, that attitude may drive that person out on their own. They may say, this is not the place for me, in which case, good for you. You have not only gotten a behavior that was unwanted out of your place of work, you've also gotten a person with an attitude that leads to that kind of behavior. You've gotten that person out of your place of work. You've won without compromising your principles of respect. Because my telling you what lives inside your head, that violates my principles of respect. Telling you you have a bad attitude, it violates my principles of respect. Though I have done it, and I still, at times, will find myself violating the get out of my head rule. And every time that I do, I get a bad taste in my own mouth because I'm violating my own principles of respect. So somebody whose unwanted behaviors you don't tolerate may opt out. And if they don't opt out, then you may come to the following consequence. Look, Jack, this behavior that we've been talking about as being unwanted, that behavior has no place here in this company. And if you want to remain, then that behavior is going to go. If you and this behavior are a package deal and you are unwilling or unable to let go of this behavior, then I'm going to be required by my job, by my responsibilities, because of what I've committed to. I'm going to be required to remove you because you and this behavior come together as a package deal. Your call. So I hope you'll pardon me for repeating myself one more time. How do you handle a bad attitude on your team? Well, you don't. You acknowledge, okay, I'm telling myself that this person has a bad attitude, and I don't know that for sure. That violates the get out of my head rule. I wonder, what are the behaviors that I'm seeing that lead me to conclude that this person has a bad attitude? These are the behaviors, or this is the one behavior. This is the behavior that I need to be different. This is the behavior that I want to have substitute for this behavior that I don't want. Let me tell this person about the gap between the behavior that I'm seeing and the behavior that I want, and what are going to be the consequences if you don't make the transition from this behavior to this one, because this is the one that's required. This one is not welcome. And this may transform the attitude that underlies this behavior. They may discover that this behavior isn't really reflective. You may discover this behavior isn't really reflective of an attitude problem. You were incorrect. And so it's easy, or relatively easy, for them to gain the skill that it requires to exhibit this behavior. And it may be that that attitude transforms. And if it doesn't, or if they can't build that skill, then you can still deal with the behavior in such a way that the behaviors on your company, the behaviors on your team, the behaviors that are effective and lead to an effective culture for everybody where people and profits rise, those behaviors you can instill, you can require, you can affect. Leadership, you as a leader have more power than you know when you are effective in your communication of your expectations and of the consequences that may come with not meeting your expectations. And you will find that consequences becomes a much more and more neutral term, and you and the folks that you work with grow in trust and respect and effectiveness and efficiency and fun and creativity and innovation. And that is my deepest, most profound wish for you. I'm Aaron Schmuckler, CEO and company culture engineer at the S-Works, where we are working tirelessly every day to improve your work life, to improve your culture, communication, collaboration, and leadership on your team so that people and profits rise. Hope you have a wonderful day.